picture the scene you already have in your head, the one you've seen 1,000 times. Two men on a dusty street, hands hovering, eyes locked, the whole town frozen, watching. Somebody's going to draw, somebody's going to be faster, somebody's going to walk away, and somebody's going to get dragged away. That's the American West, you know. Now throw it out. Because almost none of it happened. Here's what actually happened in the American West. A 20-year-old kid from a failed Texas farm is riding the same horse for the 14th day straight. His boots have holes in them that he's packed with dried grass. He hasn't washed in 3 weeks. The cattle he's driving number somewhere around 2,000 head, and 2,000 head of longhorn cattle smell exactly the way you're imagining, except worse. He's eaten beans and sourdough bread every single day for 2 months. There is a blister on his right hand the size of a poker chip, and it broke open this morning, and the reins he's holding are stiff with dried blood. He has a gun, yes, a Colt single-action army. It cost him a month and a half's wages. The bullets cost extra, and he has exactly 19 of them. He's not going to draw that gun on another cowboy. Not today, not ever. And by the time tonight is over, you're going to understand exactly why. We're going back to the American West. Not the one in the movies, not the one in the dime novels they started selling back east. The ones with the titles like Deadwood Dick, Prince of the Road, and The Lone Hand, where every chapter has a gunfight and every gunfight has a hero. We're going to the actual West, the one where the primary occupation was not shooting people, the one where the primary occupation was moving cattle from Texas to Kansas, a distance of roughly 700 miles in the heat, across rivers, through storms for about $30 a month. We're living it. One trail drive, one season. Everything you would have seen, smelled, ached, feared, and survived. I make these history stories and I genuinely have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just people who want someone to narrate the smell of 2,000 longhorn cattle directly into your ears for an hour and a half. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, not the soft darkness of a bedroom with blackout curtains, not even the darkness of a room with the lights off. This is a different kind of dark altogether. This is the dark of being outside, under an open sky, in 1875, in a part of Texas where the nearest town is 40 miles away, and the town itself is mostly just a post office and a man who sells bad whiskey. For half a second, you don't know where you are. Then your body tells you. Your back tells you first. The ground beneath your bedroll is not flat. It was never flat. You picked what looked like the least rocky patch of earth when you made camp last night, cleared away a few stones with your boot, and this is what flat looks like in South Texas in early spring. Your spine has been pressing against something angular for approximately 5 hours, and it would very much like you to know this. Your hands tell you next. The blister on your right palm has been leaking against the blanket all night. The blanket is rough wool, the kind that seems almost aggressive in its refusal to be comfortable, and the open blister is now stuck to it in a way that is going to require a decision. You could peel it off fast, or you could peel it off slow. There is no third option. It is going to hurt either way. Then the smell arrives. It's always the smell that arrives last, which makes no sense because there is nothing subtle about it. 2,000 longhorn cattle are bedded down approximately 150 yards north of where you're sleeping, and the air that comes from that direction is not air so much as a physical substance. It has weight, it has texture, it has layers that a more poetic person than you might describe as complex, and a more honest person describes as an assault. cattle, their bodies, their breath, which smells like fermented grass and something older, their hides, which are dusty and damp all at once from the morning dew that has settled on everything while you slept, the ground beneath them, which is no longer just ground but a geology of manure layered over more manure layered over the memory of manure. Underneath that, the smoke of last night's fire, cold now, just a smell with nothing behind it. And underneath that, something that is purely and completely you. 2 weeks without a proper wash. The sweat that has dried and redried and dried again into the back of your shirt until the fabric could probably stand up on its own. The particular smell of a body that has been asked to work very hard in very warm weather without the benefit of any of the amenities that the word civilized implies. Welcome to the Chisholm Trail, spring of 1875. You pull back the blanket. The dried blister tears away from the wool. You hiss through your teeth and hold the hand against your thigh for a moment, waiting for the white-hot flash of pain to recede. Around you, other men are stirring. There are 12 of you in total, not counting Cookie and not counting Mr. Aldridge, the trail boss. You sleep in a loose scatter around the dead fire, each man wrapped in his bedroll, each one emerging from sleep with the specific slowness of someone who knows exactly how many miles are left and is not in any hurry to start thinking about it. Someone to your left is coughing. That's Walsh. He's been coughing for 3 days. Nobody says anything about it because nobody wants to say the word that the cough might represent, and also because Walsh is from Virginia originally and has a particular way of telling stories about the war that can keep a whole campfire quiet for an hour, and you need him well. The sky to the east is not yet light. It's the colour that comes before light. The colour that suggests light is being considered somewhere on the other side of the world, but hasn't committed to arriving in South Texas just yet. The stars are extraordinary. That's the one thing the movies almost get right. The sky out here is genuinely something else. Back where you came from, a small failing farm in Comal County, Texas, 40 miles north of San Antonio, where your father grew cotton on land that didn't want to grow cotton, and your mother kept the accounts and tried very hard to pretend the accounts weren't as bad as they were. The sky was the same sky, but there were trees, there were buildings, there was something between you and the horizon. Out here there is nothing. The sky goes all the way down. It meets the earth at every edge of the world you can see, and between the earth and the sky there is only grass. The Comanche called this place the Sea of Grass, which is accurate in a way that doesn't fully register until you've been living on it long enough to understand what they meant. It moves. When the wind comes, and the wind always comes, the grass moves in long swells and ripples exactly the way water moves, and on days when you're tired enough, you can look out at the horizon and briefly forget where you are. But right now the wind is still, and the stars are still, and the cattle are settled into their low nighttime sounds, the occasional shift, the deep bovine exhalation, the soft percussion of horns clicking against horns, and for one brief moment before the day starts properly, before the ache in your back becomes the ache in your legs and the blister on your hand reminds you it exists with every motion of your fingers, before Mr. Aldridge calls the first watch off and the whole machine of the trail drive starts grinding forward again. For one moment, it is genuinely beautiful out here. Then Cookie bangs the triangle and the moment ends. Your name is James Elias Calhoun. Everyone calls you Cal except Walsh, who calls you Elias for reasons that remain unclear, and Mr. Aldridge, who calls you Calhoun, because Mr. Aldridge calls everyone by their last name regardless of age familiarity, or circumstance. You suspect Mr. Aldridge calls his wife Mrs. Aldridge. You're 22 years old. You've been on this trail for 41 days. Before this, you were on the farm. The farm where the cotton wouldn't grow properly. The farm where your father worked himself into a kind of quiet fury that he brought to the dinner table every night and released in small controlled bursts over things like the fence that needed mending and the seed prices that had gone up again. Your father is not a bad man. He's a man who made reasonable plans and watched them fail through no particular fault of his own, which is a specific kind of suffering that leaves a mark on everything around it. You left in February, not because of a dramatic argument, not because of one bad morning, because of 100 small mornings and the gradual understanding that the farm was going to fail, and when it failed, it was going to take everyone on it down with it, and if you stayed, you would fail with it, and that was not something you were willing to do. You'd heard about the trail drives. Everyone in Texas had heard about the trail drives. The beef market in the northern states was hungry, genuinely structurally hungry in a way that created enormous demand. And Texas had longhorn cattle in numbers that would make your eyes water. And someone had figured out that if you connected one to the other via 700 miles of walking, you could make money. Real money. Not cotton farm money. $30 a month. That's what Aldridge was paying, plus food and a place to sleep where place to sleep means a patch of ground in proximity to a campfire. You went to the meeting in Gonzales where Aldridge was hiring. You were not the most experienced man there. You were not the most experienced man in the room by a significant margin. There were men there who had made this drive 3, 4, 5 times. Who could read cattle the way some men read weather? Who could rope a running steer from horseback in conditions that would have left you sitting on the ground, holding your coil and wondering what happened? But Aldridge needed bodies. The trail drive requires a specific ratio of men to cattle. Roughly 1 cowhand per 300 head is the standard. Those standards on the trail are more aspirational than binding. And he didn't have enough experienced men. He had enough experienced men to form the core of the outfit, and then a ring of people like you around the outside, learning as they went. "You ride?" Aldridge had asked. "Yes, sir." "Rope?" Well enough. He'd looked at you the way men who have spent a long time outdoors look at people who haven't, which is to say he looked at your hands and your posture, and made several calculations that had nothing to do with anything you said. $30 a month, he said. You'll earn it. He was not wrong. The first thing you learn on a trail drive is that the gun is not the point. You knew this already, in theory. You grew up in Texas. You know what cattle work actually is, but the movies and the dime novels have done something thorough to the imagination. And even knowing better, some part of you showed up at the Aldridge Gather with a faint expectation that gunplay would be a meaningful part of the experience. It is not a meaningful part of the experience. The Colt is in a holster on your right hip. It weighs 2.5 pounds loaded, which is a noticeable amount of weight to carry all day, every day. The weight presses against your thigh when you're in the saddle, shifting and settling depending on how you're riding. You have used it exactly 3 times in 41 days. Once, you used it to kill a rattlesnake that was coiled in the grass 15 feet from where Mendoza was about to walk. This was the most legitimate use of the gun, and everyone agreed afterward that you had done the right thing, though Mendoza pointed out that you'd shot 3 times, and the snake wasn't that far away, to which you had no good response. Once you used it during the creek crossing on day 18, when a young steer got turned around in the current and started swimming back toward the south bank, directly into the path of the cattle behind him. The shot wasn't meant to hit the steer. It was meant to startle him back into the right direction. It worked. Barely. Once Walsh borrowed it in the night to shoot at what he claimed was a coyote approaching the remuda, the string of horses that every cowhand keeps nearby. It was almost certainly not a coyote. It was almost certainly a piece of brush moving in the wind, because coyotes are not actually stupid enough to approach a campfire full of men. But Walsh fired twice and felt better about things, and the horses settled and nobody argued. That's it. That's the gun's entire narrative contribution to 41 days on the Chisholm Trail. What actually threatens your life out here is not other cowboys. What actually threatens your life is the following: the cattle themselves, which are large and hooved and not remotely interested in your personal safety. The weather, which in this part of Texas in spring operates according to principles that feel personal. The rivers, which are running high from the spring rains and do not particularly care whether you cross them or not. The horses, one of whom, a roan gelding you've been assigned named Senator, has a personality that can most charitably be described as inconsistent, and the physical toll of doing hard physical labour in difficult conditions for weeks on end without adequate rest or nutrition. Also, rattlesnakes. There are a lot of rattlesnakes. None of these things can be solved with a Colt revolver. The morning routine begins with Cookie, because everything on the trail begins with Cookie. His actual name is Ezra Beaumont Hollis. He is 53 years old and was born in Louisiana, which he will tell you about at length if you give him any opening. He lost 2 fingers on his left hand in circumstances he has described in 4 different contradictory ways over the course of the trip, and you've stopped trying to determine which version, if any, is true. He is perhaps 5 feet 4 inches tall without his hat, and perhaps 5 feet 8 with it, and he wears the hat at all times, including when he is sleeping. Cookie drives the chuck wagon. He is not a cowhand. He does not ride alongside the herd or take a night watch rotation or swing a rope. His domain is a wooden wagon roughly 11 feet long, loaded with everything the outfit needs to survive the trip. The food, obviously, but also the medicine kit. Iodine, bandages, laudanum in a brown glass bottle he guards with particular intensity. The extra blankets, the tools, the ammunition, and a Dutch oven that is battered to the point of being artistically interesting. The chuck wagon moves ahead of the drive each day. Cookie leaves before the herd moves and arrives at the next campsite before the herd does, which means by the time you ride in, exhausted and dirty and in need of something hot, Cookie has already set up camp, started the fire, and is either in the process of cooking or has already cooked. This makes him the most important person on the outfit. Not the trail boss, not the most experienced cowhand. Cookie. This is not a sentimental observation. This is a structural fact about how trail drives work. The men ride 12 to 14 hours a day in conditions that burn through calories the way a fire burns through dry grass. If the food stops coming, or starts coming bad, the whole enterprise breaks down. Men who are hungry make mistakes. Men who are both hungry and exhausted make dangerous mistakes. Men who are hungry, exhausted, and eating food that is making them sick become a genuine liability in a situation where the margin for error is already thin. Cookie understands his position. He uses it. The rules around Cookie are unlike any other rules on the trail. They're not written down anywhere. They don't appear in any contract you signed. They exist in the same way that the laws of physics exist, because they have to. Rule 1, you do not touch the chuck wagon without permission. Not to rest against it, not to root around in it looking for something, not to sit on the tailgate even though the tailgate is exactly the right height for sitting, and there is nothing else on this entire landscape of the right height for sitting. Rule 2. You do not offer Cookie suggestions about the food. This one seems almost funny until you understand what happens when it's violated. A man on the Aldridge Drive 2 years ago, according to Walsh, suggested that Cookie was adding too much salt to the beans. Cookie did not respond verbally. Cookie began, for the following 3 days, serving that man his food last, after everyone else had gotten theirs, and in quantities that were technically sufficient, but noticeably less generous than everyone else received. The man did not complain about the salt again. Rule 3. You do not insult Cookie. Not his cooking, not his wagon, not his hat. Especially not his hat. Not his stories about Louisiana. This rule applies even when the sourdough bread is so dense it could be used for construction purposes, and the coffee is so strong it feels like a threat. In exchange for these rules being followed, Cookie performs what amounts to a daily miracle. 3 times a day, in the open air, often in wind, sometimes in rain, always in the presence of a smoke that the air currents seem to specifically direct toward his face. Ezra Beaumont Hollis produces hot food for 13 men and a trail boss out of ingredients that include dried beans, salt pork, flour, lard, dried apples, coffee beans, cornmeal, dried beef, and whatever he has opportunistically acquired at the last settlement or from the land itself. You have eaten antelope that Cookie shot himself from the wagon seat. You have eaten catfish that he negotiated from a homesteader at a creek crossing for reasons that remain a minor mystery. You have eaten sourdough bread in quantities that, if you'd been asked beforehand, you'd have said were physically impossible, and you are grateful. Every single day, you're genuinely, actively grateful in a way that you have never been grateful for food before, because food before this meant your mother's kitchen and the assumption of continuity. Food now means Cookie, and Cookie could leave, and then there would be no food, and you are 700 miles from anywhere. The morning on day 42 begins with the beans. They have been soaking since last night in the Dutch oven. Cookie started the fire before the sun was up, and by the time you've rolled out of your bedroll and worked the feeling back into your feet and made the executive decision about the blister, fast, definitely fast, one quick pull while looking away, the beans are already smelling like the best thing in the world. Beans and salt pork and a residue of chili pepper that Cookie adds to almost everything, and which by now you associate so completely with safety and warmth that you think you might cook chili pepper for the rest of your life just to feel this feeling in a different context. Coffee comes in a cup that you provide yourself. Cookie does not provide cups. Cookie provides the coffee, which he makes by the bucket in a system that involves throwing the grounds directly into boiling water and waiting, and the cups are your responsibility. Yours has a dent in it from a moment 2 weeks ago that you'd rather not think about, but it holds coffee without leaking, and that is all that is required. You take your cup and find a spot away from the smoke and eat your beans and drink your coffee and watch the sky turn from the colour before light to the colour of light itself, spreading from the east in bands of pale yellow and then orange and then white. Senator watches you from the remuda with what you have come to recognise as his resting expression, which is a kind of exhausted contempt. "I know," you tell him. Senator blinks. The horse question is one the movies also get wrong. In the movies, a cowboy has one horse. The horse has a name. There is a relationship between the cowboy and the horse that is portrayed with a warmth and specificity that you now understand is not entirely invented, because the bond between a cowhand and his horse is real. But it's real in the way that any partnership between two living things who depend on each other for survival is real. which is to say it's practical first and affectionate second. But one horse is not how this works. Every cowhand on a trail drive is assigned a string of horses, a remuda. Yours consists of Senator and 4 others. A bay mare named Patience, which is funny because she has none. A dun gelding with no name that the previous owner called Horse, which stuck. A grey called Preacher, who is actually the most pleasant of the 5, and who you ride on days when you need the moral support. And a young sorrel who's still learning what it means to work cattle, and who you are still learning how to communicate with. The relationship being roughly that of 2 people who have been set up on an arrangement of mutual necessity and are trying to figure out if they can work together. You need multiple horses because the work destroys horses. Not permanently, not in ways that are visible the next morning. Horses recover well from rest. But in the course of a single day of working cattle, a horse will cover ground that would leave a single animal broken by week 3. By rotating through the string, each horse gets rest while the others work. The remuda is managed by the wrangler, a 14-year-old boy named Tomas, who is technically the lowest ranked member of the outfit, and who has, in your observation, one of the harder jobs. Tomas drives the remuda ahead of the main herd but behind Cookie's wagon, which puts him in the unenviable position of eating the wagon's dust but not quite having the wagon's protection. He sleeps near the remuda, waking at every sound that might indicate a horse has gotten loose or spooked. He's been on 3 trail drives already, starting at 11, and he moves through the string of horses with the sureness that makes your own occasional struggles with Senator feel embarrassing. Tomas does not carry a gun. He's offered one impression of what he thinks about guns. Too heavy. He said this once and hasn't revisited it. He does carry a rope, which he can do things with that you suspect require a talent you simply do not possess. The point about the horses and the remuda and the whole machinery of the trail drive is this. Everything out here is a system. The cook and the chuck wagon and the food. The wrangler and the remuda. The trail boss and the point riders and the flank riders and the drag riders. The lead cattle and the stragglers. The order of march and the midday water stop and the nightly rotation of the night watch. It is all a system, and the system depends on everyone doing their part, and when a part fails, you feel it immediately. This is the first thing that explains why cowboys didn't draw guns on each other. You cannot run a trail drive with dead cowhands. This sounds obvious when you say it plainly. But it needs saying plainly, because the whole mythology of the West is built on individualism. The lone gunman, the solitary hero, the man against the landscape. And the actual West was almost the opposite of that. The actual West was cooperative to a degree that would surprise people who grew up on the mythology. 700 miles, 2,000 cattle, 14 men, 1 wagon. If someone gets shot, you don't have enough people to do the work. If you don't have enough people to do the work, the cattle scatter, the drive fails, and nobody gets paid, including the man who did the shooting. You're all, in the most literal and unglamorous sense, in this together. The cattle start moving around mid-morning. Once they've grazed on the overnight campgrounds and the sun has been up long enough to take the chill off the air. Longhorn cattle are not what you pictured, which is to say, they are not the cattle of farms and paintings. They are angular, leggy animals with a wildness in their eyes that domestic cattle have lost over generations of selective breeding. They can run faster than you'd expect. They can cover ground over rough terrain that would stop a horse in its tracks. The horns can span 5 or 6 feet from tip to tip on a mature bull, you've measured, and they wear these horns with an awareness that suggests they know exactly how much space they occupy. They are not friendly. This needs to be clear. Longhorns are not dangerous in the way that a horse that bucks is dangerous, or a dog that bites is dangerous. They are dangerous in the way that a crowd is dangerous, not because any individual animal intends you harm, but because the combined weight and momentum of 2,000 animals moving together is a force that will go through you, or over you, or around you, with complete indifference to your preferences. Your job as a flank rider, which is exactly what it sounds like, riding along the side of the moving herd, is to keep the cattle from spreading. The herd should move roughly in the shape of an elongated oval, the led cattle setting the pace at the front, the main body following, the stragglers being pushed by the drag riders at the back. Your job is to prevent the cattle on your side from wandering sideways into terrain that will make them harder to collect, or water they'll want to stand in, or grass that looks better than the grass they're standing on, which to cattle looks like all grass everywhere. The drag riders have the worst job. They ride behind the herd and eat the dust. 2,000 cattle in movement produce a column of dust that hangs in the air for minutes after the herd has passed, and the drag riders live inside that column for 8 to 10 hours a day. By evening, the drag riders are coated in a fine layer of trail dust that has combined with the sweat of the day to create a kind of paste. You can usually tell who's been on drag by looking at them, even after they've wiped their faces. The dust gets into the creases, it gets into the corners of your eyes. It tastes like the earth tastes, mineral and dry, and you dream about water in ways that you never thought of water before. Today you're on the right flank. Senator is being cooperative, which is not always the case, and you've settled into the rhythm of the morning. The slow drift left when a group of cattle angles toward the grass slope to your right. The steady pressure of Senator's shoulder against their direction. The occasional shout of "Yup." That means very little to the cattle, but makes you feel like you're doing something. The sound of the herd moving is its own thing. You could close your eyes and know exactly where you are from the sound alone. The low, continuous percussion of hooves on the dry grass. Not a gallop, just a walk. Thousands of small impacts building into something that you feel as much as hear. A vibration that comes up through your horse and into your legs and lower back. The clicking of horn against horn. The occasional long bellow of a cow that has something to communicate, though what cattle communicate to each other is largely beyond your ability to interpret. The grunt and huff of breath. The leathery creak of your own saddle, which you have ridden so many hours in that you know its particular sounds the way you know your own breathing. Underneath all of that, the wind in the grass, that constant dry whispered sound that is the baseline of this landscape. Not a rush of wind, not gusts, just the steady, patient movement of air across millions of grass blades that runs under everything else and never entirely stops. It is, in a strange way, almost meditative. And then the right front cattle start drifting toward a draw, and you press Senator left into the gap, and the meditation ends, and the work begins again. What I need you to understand about the gun, the actual gun, not the movie gun, is what it costs. Your Colt single-action army, the one on your hip right now, the one that weighs 2.5 pounds and has been pressing against your thigh for 41 days, cost you $21 when you bought it in San Antonio before the drive began. $21. Your wage on this drive is $30 a month. The drive, cattle to market, takes about 3 months all told. $90 total if Aldridge pays at the end and you survive to collect. $21 is nearly a quarter of what you'll earn this entire season. Before expenses, the bullets cost extra. 20 rounds of .45 Colt ammunition will run you approximately $1.50, depending on where you buy them. You bought them in San Antonio, where the prices are better than anywhere you'll be for the next 3 months. You have 19 bullets remaining after the rattlesnake and the creek crossing, and Walsh's probable coyote incident. This is not a lot of bullets. Now here is the thing the movies don't show you. In the movies, guns are fired constantly and reloaded instantly, and bullets are an inexhaustible resource. In actual 1875, the man pointing a gun at another man has made a financial commitment that his emotions need to justify. More importantly, out here, if you fire your gun at another cowhand and the other cowhand lives, which is statistically likely, the accuracy of handguns at conversational distances under stress is not what people imagine. You're now in a situation where you have used a bullet on a problem that still exists. The problem is now angrier than before, and you still need to work alongside this person for the next 50 days to get the cattle to Abilene. If the other cowhand does not live, you have created a different problem. You have killed a man that Mr. Aldridge hired, which means Mr. Aldridge is down a rider, which means the remaining riders have to cover the dead man's territory, which means everyone works harder and earns the same, and Mr. Aldridge will not be pleased, and Mr. Aldridge is the man who controls whether you get paid at the end of this, and at the end of this, there is the law. Even in 1875, even in Texas, killing a man has consequences. Not always the consequences you'd think, and not always consistent, but consequences. There will be questions, there might be a hearing, there might be a trial. All of this so that you could settle a disagreement about what exactly? On a trail drive? About the beans? About who gets the better sleeping spot near the fire? About who talked back to whom? The logic of the movie Gunfight requires a kind of ego that the trail drive systematically beats out of you. Not because the men are better people than movie gunfighters, not because they've had spiritual revelations about the sanctity of life, but because the trail drive is a factory that produces practicality. You're too tired for dramatic gestures. You're too invested in your own survival to spend it on someone else's death. The gun is a tool for rattlesnakes and straying cattle and emergencies of the natural world. That's it. That's the gun. There's a saying that Mr. Aldridge uses occasionally when someone starts to get hot about something. Save it for the work. He doesn't specify what it is. He doesn't have to. He means the energy. He means the heat. He means the part of you that wants to push back hard against whatever is frustrating you in that moment. Save it for the work. There is always more work. On day 23, you crossed the Red River. This was the thing about day 23 that you were warned about before you left. Everyone who's been on the drive before warned you about the river crossings, and the Red River in particular. The Red River in spring is not the Red River in summer. In summer, depending on the year, you can sometimes walk cattle across it in water that barely reaches their bellies. In spring, after a wet winter and a wet early spring, the Red River is a different animal entirely. You can smell it a day before you see it. The water smell, the particular wet earth, half-rotting vegetation smell of a major river that has been running high and carrying everything in its path. You know it from the Guadalupe River back home, that smell. The smell of water that is moving fast and has been moving fast for a while and has things in it that you'd rather not identify. The herd knows it too. Cattle that have been on this trail before respond to the smell of the river. Not the way horses respond exactly. Cattle are not subtle in their emotional communication. But there is a shift in the herd as you approach, a restlessness, a tossing of heads. The led cattle, which Mendoza has been managing since the second day, slow and bunch. Mendoza is the most experienced man on the outfit. He has made this drive 7 times. He is a vaquero, a word that means something more specific than cowboy, something that carries the weight of a tradition that existed before anyone called it the cowboy tradition, the Mexican and Spanish cattle culture that the American cattle industry ran on without entirely acknowledging. His rope work is so exact it looks like physics rather than skill. He reads cattle the way Walsh reads rooms, some instinctive social intelligence that translates perfectly from people to livestock. Mendoza takes one look at the Red River and says something in Spanish that you don't entirely understand but gather is unfavourable. How bad? You ask. He considers this. Swimmable, he says finally. Not comfortable. Swimmable. Mr. Aldridge rides to the bank and stands there for a long time looking at the water. The river is maybe 300 yards across at this point, running fast and brown, carrying pieces of brush and wood along its surface. The current is visible even from the bank, those dark lines on the surface that indicate something serious happening underneath. We'll hold them here overnight, he says. Let the herd settle. Cross in the morning. The night before a river crossing is a specific kind of tension. The cattle feel the water nearby and don't settle easily. The night watch shifts are longer and harder than usual, because a herd that won't settle is a herd that might decide to do something about its discomfort at 3 in the morning, and the something it might decide to do is not something you want to manage in the dark. You draw the midnight watch. 4 hours riding slow circles around the outer edge of the herd in the dark, singing. This is the other thing the movies don't show you properly, though sometimes they try. You sing to the cattle. Not because singing soothes cattle in any mystical way, though it might. There is something about the human voice in a regular cadence that seems to signal to them that the large predator nearby is not currently hunting. Mainly you sing because the cattle need to know you're there. A cowhand moving in silence around the edge of a night herd is a surprise. A sudden movement and a sudden sound in the dark is exactly how you start a stampede at 2 in the morning. The singing is the signal. Here I am, moving slowly. Nothing to worry about. The songs don't matter. The men sing hymns, work songs, fragments of things they half remember from childhood, made up things. Walsh sings old Virginia songs with words that are sometimes sad and sometimes not, and always sound like they were written for exactly this kind of night. You sing something your mother used to sing in the kitchen, a song you couldn't tell you the name of and couldn't tell you the words of clearly. But the melody is there, and you sing it soft and slightly off-key in the dark while Senator walks the slow circle, and the cattle make their low sounds, and the river you cannot see makes its sounds in the distance. There is a loneliness to the night watch that is not unpleasant. It's the loneliness of being the only awake person in a landscape, of moving through the dark while others sleep, of holding the watch, which is a real thing, a responsibility, an edge between safety and danger that you're walking in every literal sense. You think about home on night watch. You think about your mother's face, which is easier to see in the dark than in the day for some reason. You think about your father and the cotton and what the farm will look like when, if, you get back. You think about the money in Aldridge's ledger, $30 a month accumulating, and what it will mean to put some of it in your father's hands. You think about the river. The morning of the crossing is cold and overcast and windy, which is not ideal. Mr. Aldridge gathers the outfit at dawn and goes through it plainly. The water is high. The current is strong in the middle section. here to here. He marks the air with his hand. We're going to get the lead cattle in first. Mendoza has the point. Once the lead is across, the herd will follow. Your job is to keep them moving and keep them together. If cattle start turning back, push them forward. If a man goes in, call it and we'll get him. He looks at each of you in turn. Do not panic. The cattle will take their cues from you. If you panic, they panic. And a panicking herd in a river is the worst thing you will face on this entire drive, you understand? Silence, nods. Calhoun. He looks at you specifically. You have no idea why. Keep your right flank. Don't let them spread upstream. Yes, sir. Good. Cookie has already taken the chuck wagon across a ford 3 miles upstream, which is how it works. The wagon crosses where it's safe, the cattle cross where they must. By the time you're watching the first cattle enter the water, Cookie is somewhere ahead, already setting up for the midday meal. Mendoza takes the lead cattle in. He's on his best horse for this, a big grey that's been on this drive before and knows rivers, and he wades in without ceremony, the horse entering the water chest deep within a few steps, and then swimming, Mendoza staying in the saddle as the grey's legs work beneath the surface. The lead cattle hesitate at the bank. This is the moment. If they turn back now, the drive turns back with them, and you spend another half day getting them settled and move back to the bank, and then you do this again, Mendoza calls back. A sound you can't translate, a particular vaquero call that carries across the water. The lead steer, Mendoza has been working with this animal specifically since day 3, because managing the lead steer is managing the whole herd, enters the water, and the herd follows. What happens next is not orderly. Nothing about 2,000 cattle entering a river at once is orderly. The ones at the front swim. The ones behind them press forward. The ones behind those pressing too. The whole mass moving the way a crowd moves towards something, not thinking, just following the pressure at its back. You enter the water on Senator's right flank and the cold hits you immediately, the splash of it, the spray. And then the current catches you, and it is stronger than you anticipated, even knowing it would be strong. And for a moment Senator stiffens and you feel the horse consider its options. Up, you say quietly, because Mendoza is right and panic is the thing that ends you. Up, Senator. Up. Senator makes a decision in favour of continuing, and his legs find their rhythm in the water, and you are swimming across the Red River in late spring of 1875 with 2,000 cattle around you on all sides. The sound. You will remember the sound for the rest of your life. It is a 2,000 large animals moving through water makes a sound that you feel in your chest, a churning, roaring, splashing percussion that fills the world from edge to edge. The water is brown and moving fast, and there are cattle everywhere you can see. The long lines of their backs, the occasional horn breaking the surface, the whites of eyes in heads that are stretched up to keep noses above the waterline, and underneath all of that, the river itself. The voice of the river, which is not a gentle sound and never was, the deep, constant rushing sound of a large body of water moving fast, indifferent to the thousands of living things crossing through it. You are somewhere in the middle when the near disaster happens. 3 cattle on your side begin turning. The current has pushed them out of the main crossing angle, and they are drifting sideways, which means they're fighting the current instead of cutting across it, which means they're tiring faster than the others, and tired cattle in a river will turn back toward the near bank. And if 3 cattle turn, more will follow, and if enough follow, the crossing becomes a crisis. You have no margin here, no room for analysis or second guessing. Senator sees it at the same moment you do. The horse reads the cattle as well as you do, maybe better, and turns without you asking, angling hard to cut off the drifting animals. You shout, the inarticulate cowhand shout that means nothing specific and everything generally. It means here I am. It means move. It means you are less comfortable going this direction than the other direction, trust me. Senator pushes the water between you and the turning cattle, a living wall of horse in a river, and the cattle hit the pressure of his presence and check their turn. For a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, it could go either way. Then the lead of the 3 gives up on the sideways drift and points itself toward the far bank, and the other 2 follow, and the small crisis folds itself back into the larger event, which is still happening all around you. You realize your hands are shaking on the reins, not from cold, though the water is cold, from the specific adrenaline of a close thing, the understanding, physical and immediate, of what a few seconds of indecision might have cost. You grip the reins, Senator swims on, the far bank comes closer. Getting 2,000 cattle across the Red River takes 3.5 hours. Not the actual swimming. The swimming for each animal takes maybe 4 minutes. But moving 2,000 animals in sequence through an entry point, across the river and out the far bank, is a continuous, grinding process that requires people at every stage, holding cattle at the bank, managing the entry, riding the crossing, managing the exit, catching the animals that drift too far downstream and need to be pushed back into the collect point. By the time the last straggler, a cantankerous old cow that has been a problem since day one and shows no signs of improvement, is pushed across, it is past noon. The herd is scattered across a half-mile of the far bank, grazing, recovering. The horses are exhausted. The men are exhausted. Everyone is wet. Cookie has a fire going and the beans are ready and the coffee is hot and you eat your beans standing up, because sitting down feels like it might lead to not getting up again, and you drink your coffee looking back at the river you just crossed, and you feel something that it takes you a while to name. Pride is part of it. The specific pride of having done a hard thing and come out the other side. But it's not just that. It's something about the scale of it. The river crossing is one of those events that reorganizes your sense of what you're capable of. You crossed the Red River in flood stage with 2,000 cattle, and nobody died, and nothing was lost, and the drive goes on. Walsh materializes beside you with his own coffee. He looks at the river and says nothing for a while. 3rd time I've crossed that river, he says finally. Still takes everything I have. Every time? Every time! He drinks his coffee. The 4th time it'll probably still take everything. The 15th time I don't know. Maybe you just stop adding it up. He walks away back to his beans. You look at the river one more time, brown and fast and already moving away from this moment, as water does. Tomorrow it won't be your problem anymore. Tomorrow it'll be the next river. There are always more rivers. The storm comes on day 47 without much warning. There is warning, in the way that there is always some warning if you're paying attention and know what to look for. The sky to the southwest takes on a colour in the late afternoon that is not a natural sky colour. A greenish yellow that Mendoza, who is paying attention, points out to Mr. Aldridge. The wind shifts direction. The cattle respond first. Before any of the men have consciously registered what's coming, the herd becomes restless in a way that is different from river restlessness. More agitated, higher pitched if cattle have pitches. Tighten up, Aldridge says, and the word moves through the outfit the way it always does, man to man, a quiet current of information. You tighten up. Every rider moves closer to the herd, collapsing the perimeter, bringing the cattle into a more compact mass. The idea is that a tight herd is harder to spook than a scattered one. The idea is theoretical. The practice depends on the storm. The storm that arrives is not theoretical. It comes from the southwest in about 40 minutes, moving faster than you expected storms to move, faster than it seemed like it should be able to move. The greenish-yellow sky is replaced by a sky that is simply dark, a darkness that is not the darkness of night, but the darkness of something solid arriving between you and the sun. The wind spikes. It goes from the steady dry wind of the Texas plain to something with violence in it, a wind that hits you in the face like a physical thing and pushes against Senator hard enough that you feel the horse brace. Then the lightning starts, lightning on the open plain. This is something that no photograph, no painting, no description manages to adequately convey, because it is fundamentally an experience of scale. There is nothing between you and the sky. There are no buildings, no trees worth speaking of, no hills, just the grass and the cattle and the men and the horses, and above all of that, a sky that has decided to turn itself into an artillery demonstration. The first strike hits somewhere maybe a mile to the southwest. A white crack that goes from the sky to the ground and back to the sky so fast that the eyes refuse to properly register it. And then the thunder comes 3 seconds later. Not a rumble, but a concussion. A physical thump in the chest that Senator flinches from hard enough that you nearly lose your seat. The cattle bolt. Not all of them. Not immediately. The way a stampede begins is not the way the movies show it. Not a simultaneous decision. Not the whole herd moving at once. It starts at a point. It starts with one animal that hits its threshold and goes, and the cattle around that animal respond to the sudden movement, and the animals around those animals respond, and it ripples outward through the herd like the original lightning, fast and white and total, until what was a tight mass of 2,000 cattle is a 2,000 animal mechanism of forward motion that weighs somewhere in the neighbourhood of 3 million pounds and is travelling at approximately 25 miles per hour. A stampede. A real stampede. Ride. That's Aldridge. The voice carries even over the wind, over the thunder that is now nearly continuous, over the sound of the herd, which is a sound you will hear in your dreams for years. It is the sound of the earth being struck by hooves, thousands and thousands of hooves, a percussion so dense it stops being individual sounds and becomes a continuous roar, a geological event, the earth underneath you shuddering with it. You ride. Senator needs no instruction. The horse has been here before, or if not here, somewhere close enough to hear that his body knows what to do. He runs. He runs with the kind of commitment that horses have when survival has entered the equation, running alongside the flank of the herd, the cattle rolling past you like a river, those enormous bodies in motion, the horns swinging, the eyes wild and white. The rain hits. It doesn't arrive gradually. It arrives all at once, the way Texas rain arrives, as though the sky has been holding it and has now decided to release the entire inventory. In 30 seconds you are completely soaked. The rain is cold in the way that only rain that comes with lightning is cold, a cold that doesn't feel like temperature so much as like electrical charge, and it hits your face and your hands and runs down the back of your neck and collects in your boots, and your horse is running in rain that is now making the ground slick. Lightning again. This one is close, very close. The flash and the sound arrive almost simultaneously, a crack of white, and then a sound that is inside your skull more than outside it, and Senator shies hard right, and you lose a stirrup. and for 2 full seconds you are staying on this horse by grip alone, your hands in the reins and your legs clamped against his sides, and nothing else between you and the ground that is rushing past at 25 miles per hour. You find the stirrup, you don't know how, muscle memory, or luck, or some version of both. The herd is beginning to curve. This is what you're trying to accomplish. You and every other rider who's out here in the rain and the lightning and the dark, you're trying to turn the herd, not stop it. You cannot stop a stampede, not directly, not with any amount of force, but curve it, bend it into a circle, run the leaders back around toward the tail of the herd until the front and the back are running alongside each other, and the whole thing becomes a mill, a spinning mass of cattle that is still moving, still panicking, but no longer going anywhere new, moving in a circle, running until they run themselves out. Mendoza is at the front. You can see him in the flashes of lightning, the grey horse, the man shape, working the lead cattle with a precision that seems impossible under these conditions, angling, pushing, turning. He has done this before. He knows what the curve looks like when it starts working and what it looks like when it isn't. Walsh is on the far flank. You can hear him. Not his words, not in this noise, but the sound of his horse and his shout. The rest of you are filling the spaces, riding the edges of the mill, pushing inward when cattle threaten to break out of the circle, shouting and riding and getting rained on and trying not to get struck by lightning. The young sorrel from your string, you're not on him. You're on Senator, but he's in the remuda that Tomas is managing somewhere behind all this. The young sorrel breaks free at some point in the chaos and runs. You find this out later. He ran south, into the dark for reasons of his own, and Tomas had to spend 2 hours the next morning finding him. The mill takes shape over the course of about 20 minutes, which is the longest 20 minutes you have experienced in your life, a 20 minutes in which you're wet and cold, and your hands are bleeding again, and Senator is breathing hard underneath you, and the lightning is still coming, and the ground is shaking, and then, slowly, the pace of the cattle begins to drop. Not immediately, not all at once. But animals at the centre of the mill are slowing, and as they slow, they're absorbing the energy of the animals behind them, and the whole thing begins to lose momentum the way a spinning top loses momentum gradually, then more quickly, until what was a stampede is a tight, heaving, still frightened mass of cattle standing in the rain, too tired to run anymore. The lightning moves east. The rain continues but loses its violence, becoming just rain, the ordinary kind. You stop Senator and let him breathe. He is shaken. Not visibly exactly, but you can feel it through the saddle. The fine tremor of a horse that has pushed very hard and is now processing the aftermath. You put your hand on his neck. He's soaked through and hot from the running. That's enough, you tell him. That's enough. The damage assessment takes most of the following day. 40 cattle lost, not dead, lost. They ran in the night and didn't come back with the herd, and now they're somewhere on the plain, moving in the direction they last had momentum. 2 riders spend a full day looking for them. They find 23, the other 17 are gone, 17 cattle. At the market prices Aldridge has been quoted in Abilene, that's somewhere between $200 and $300 in losses. Aldridge writes it in his ledger without visible emotion, which is either professionalism or something that looks like professionalism and is actually a kind of grief he's decided not to perform. No one is seriously hurt. Walsh took a fall when his horse went down in the mud, and has a bruised rib and a temper that is shorter than usual. Mendoza's grey horse has a gash on its left foreleg from something, a horn probably, that Cookie cleans and bandages with the same efficiency he brings to everything. The cut is not deep. You have a bruise on your right forearm from where you hit the saddle horn during the stirrup incident that has turned a remarkable shade of purple by the following morning. It doesn't affect your ability to ride, so you don't report it. The remuda sorrel is found grazing peacefully 1.5 miles south of the stampede location. He appears entirely unbothered by the night's events. Tomas brings him back with the expression of someone who has strong feelings he has chosen not to express. Cookie, who drove the chuck wagon at speed to get it out of the herd's path and nearly tipped it on a drainage cut in the dark, is making a particular kind of coffee this morning that is approximately twice as strong as usual. Nobody says anything about this. Around the fire, after the assessment and the accounting and the planning for the day's push, there is a silence that is different from the usual silence. A silence that has something in it, something unspoken that everyone feels. Walsh breaks it, eventually. "Well," he says, "that was the one." No one asks what he means. Everyone knows what he means. Every drive has one. One event that defines it, that you'll tell stories about years later, the thing that makes it real to someone who wasn't there. We crossed the red in flood stage is a story. We ran cattle in a lightning storm and milled them in the rain in the dark is a story. That was the one, is Walsh acknowledging that you have, collectively, your story now. 43 cattle to find, Aldridge says, and the silence ends, and the work begins again. On day 58, you see Abilene. You've been hearing about Abilene for almost 2 months. Not in the way you'd hear about a place in a book, distant, abstract. But the way you hear about a place when you're walking toward it, when it's the reason for every step, when the distance to it is measured in days, and every morning you wake up one day closer. The approach is gradual. The plane doesn't suddenly present you with a city. The city announces itself through proxies. First, other cattle drives. You've been leapfrogging with 2 other outfits since the Red River crossing, and as you approach the railhead, more appear. The plain, which has been mostly empty, begins to fill. You can see the dust of other herds on the horizon. At night, other campfires. Then the smell changes. This sounds like it should be a joke, given everything about the trail drive's olfactory environment. But it isn't. The smell of a cattle town is its own thing. It's the smell of your drive multiplied by all the other drives converging on the same point, concentrated and contained. It has the sharp metal edge of money somewhere in it, if money can be said to have a smell, which after 2 months on the trail you're beginning to think it can. Then the buildings. From a distance, Abilene looks like a drawing of a town more than an actual town. The flat prairie makes every structure look slightly unreal against the sky. The water tower first, then the grain elevators along the railway. Then gradually the actual buildings filling in detail as you approach. The wooden storefronts, the hotels, the saloons, and the railroad. The Kansas Pacific Railway. You've never seen a railroad up close. There isn't one anywhere near Comal County, and the actual physical presence of it is something you weren't entirely prepared for. The iron tracks running straight as a line across the grassland, disappearing into the distance in both directions, as if someone drew a rule across the earth and said, "This is where commerce happens." The cattle pens are at the edge of town. Long wooden fenced enclosures designed to hold hundreds of animals, while they wait to be loaded onto the cars that will take them north and east to the slaughterhouses and the markets. The pens are full. There are already cattle in every pen. Cattle that arrive before you. Cattle from other drives, from other ranches, longhorns and other breeds that have been walked here on different trails by other tired men. The sound of it, approaching, the combined voice of all those animals in their pens, is something you could hear from 2 miles out. Aldridge handles the sale. He handles it alone, because this is not the kind of negotiation where an apprentice cowhand's presence is useful. He rides into Abilene ahead of the herd to meet the buyers, and the rest of you hold the cattle at the edge of the pens and wait. The wait takes 4 hours. You eat jerky. You watch the town. You talk to Walsh, who has been to Abilene twice before, and who gives you what he presents as a complete orientation in about 10 minutes. The key points. The hotel with the thin walls is the Grand Palace, which is not grand. The hotel with better walls is the drover's cottage, which charges more and is worth it. There are several saloons, and the distinction between them is primarily price. The restaurant at the drover's charges $1 for a meal, which sounds like a lot and is a lot and is also the best meal you're going to eat in a long time, so budget accordingly. And the guns, Walsh says, in the tone of someone completing an important list. What about them? Walsh points. There's a sign. You've seen it, but we're waiting for him to explain it. The sign is posted at the edge of town on a post, and it reads plainly, Notice. All persons are requested to leave their firearms with the marshal's office upon entering Abilene. Firearms may be reclaimed upon departure. You check your gun when you come in, Walsh says. They've had ordinances about it for a few years now, since Hickok was marshal, actually. Wild Bill? Wild Bill? Yes, though he's been gone a few years. Walsh says this with the particular tone of someone who met Wild Bill Hickok, and is going to let you figure that out yourself. But the ordinance stayed. You look at the sign, then you look at the town, the busy main street visible from here, the men moving up and down it. Does everyone follow it? Walsh looks at you with an expression that is not quite amusement and not quite impatience. Think about it, Elias. Who's coming into Abilene right now? Cowboys, cowhands, men who've been on the trail for 2-3 months, tired and dirty, and they've got money coming and they're going to go spend it on food and whiskey and cards and a bath in a real bathtub. Now ask yourself, does the town that wants their money want them coming in armed? You think about it. The mathematics of the thing are different here than on the trail. On the trail, the cost of violence falls on the outfit. Dead men, broken trust, a drive that doesn't finish. In town, the cost of violence falls on the town itself. Businesses, property, other people's safety. And the town has a marshal, and the marshal has deputies. And the marshal and his deputies are the concentrated force of a community that has a very specific interest in cowboy money arriving in town and being spent on beds and food and entertainment and departing without incident. They enforce it. They enforce it, Walsh says simply. You check your gun or you go back down the road. You check your gun. It feels strange doing it. You've been wearing this thing for 2 months, and it's become part of the physical landscape of your own body in a way that you didn't entirely notice until you remove it. The marshal's deputy who takes it is a young man with a quiet manner and a methodical way of recording your information, name, outfit, description of the weapon, in a ledger that is already thick with similar entries. You can pick it up when you're heading out, he says. Give you this ticket. The ticket is a small rectangle of pasteboard with a number stamped on it. You put it in your breast pocket. First time in Abilene, the deputy asks. Yes. Get a meal at the drover's before you do anything else, he says. Trust me. He's right. You get a meal at the drover's cottage. Beef steak and potatoes and bread that is soft and white, and bears no resemblance to any bread Cookie has ever produced. Which is not a criticism of Cookie. It's a recognition of the difference between frontier sourdough and hotel bread. And you eat it at a table sitting down on a chair with a back, and you are aware of the chair's back in a way that people who've been sitting on chairs with backs their whole lives are probably not aware of it. The chair's back is a luxury. It is the concentrated luxury of civilization, the idea that sitting down should not also require you to hold yourself upright. You eat everything on the plate. Then you ask for more bread, which they bring without comment, and you eat that too. Walsh sits across from you, working through his own steak with the focused attention of a man who's been eating beans for 2 months. He paid us, Walsh says between bites, and this is how you find out. Aldridge rode back from the buyer meeting and distributed the wages outside the pen. He counted out the coins himself from a canvas bag into each man's hand, making brief eye contact with each person as he did so. You received your 3 months, $90, plus a small bonus that Aldridge described as for the river, which you understood immediately, and Mendoza apparently received double. $90 and a bonus. You are holding right now more money than you have ever held at one time. It is in your front pocket. It has been there for approximately 2 hours, and you are already deeply aware of it, in the way that you are aware of a new tooth, something that you keep checking on. What are you going to do with it? Walsh asks. Send some home, keep some for next season. Walsh nods. Smart. What about you? Walsh considers this. He has a way of looking at things from a distance, even when they're right in front of him. A slightly removed quality that might be the residue of whatever he saw in Virginia during the war. Pay some debts, he says. Sleep in a real bed for a week. Drink some good whiskey. Not bad whiskey. Elias, I have been drinking bad whiskey for 4 months. I am entitled to at least 1 night of whiskey that costs what whiskey should cost. You raise your coffee cup. Walsh raises his. The streets of Abilene in the height of cattle season are not what the movies show you, and they are also exactly what the movies show you, which is one of those paradoxes of history that takes a moment to resolve. They are not what the movies show because nobody is shooting. The main street of Abilene, full of cowhands who have just finished trail drives and received their wages, and are now spending those wages with the enthusiasm of people who haven't had anything to spend money on for 3 months, is loud and energetic, and in places already tipping toward chaotic. But it is not violent. There are drunken men. There are men in the process of becoming drunken men. There are arguments happening outside the doors of the saloons, the kind that have the specific quality of arguments between people who've been living in close quarters for months and have finally found somewhere to deposit their accumulated resentments. But nobody's drawing a gun, because nobody has a gun. The guns are all at the marshal's office, sitting in numbered bins, waiting for their owners to leave town. They are exactly what the movies show because it looks like the movies. That's actually the easiest way to explain it. Wooden storefronts, a muddy main street, men in battered hats, women who work in the saloons and the hotels and whose faces have the particular expression of people who have seen many cattle seasons and have developed an immunity to the novelty of trail-dusty cowboys. The smell is Abilene smell. Cattle from the pens, horses from the hitching rails, food from the restaurants, whiskey from every door that opens, cold smoke from the stoves, and underneath all of it the smell of the railroad. iron and grease and something electric and new that you can't quite name. You walk down the main street slowly, looking at everything. There is a barber shop with 3 chairs, all occupied. The line outside involves men who've been on the trail long enough that the barber is, for them, a more pressing need than the saloon. You understand this. You stop and put your name in. There is a general store with a window display that you stand in front of for a full minute. Not because you're going to buy anything in the window, boots, a saddle, rope, a hat, but because the display is arranged with an artfulness that seems extravagant and almost funny out here. Someone's decision that the window should look appealing, that commerce should have aesthetic ambition. There is a photographer's shop with examples of portraits in the window. Men in their Sunday best, women in elaborate dresses, families arranged stiffly for posterity. And one photograph that catches your eye and holds it. A group of cowhands, 7 or 8 of them, standing and sitting in a loose group, dusty and squinting at the camera, caught in some moment between drives. Their guns are all holstered, you notice. Every single one. The photographer is apparently doing good business. There's a man inside being photographed right now. You can see the flash of the magnesium lamp through the window. The barber finishes with you 40 minutes after you put your name in, and you sit in the chair and he cuts your hair and shaves you for the first time in 6 weeks with a straight razor, and you look at yourself in the mirror afterward for a long moment. You look older, not dramatically older, not in a way that would be obvious to someone who knew you from before, but different. The face in the mirror is more weathered than the one you remember. The skin has been in the sun for 2 months and shows it. There are new lines around the eyes from squinting. The hands, you notice, are the most changed. The calluses have built on calluses. The blister on the right palm has healed into a hardened ridge of skin that would have looked alarming 6 months ago and now seems simply correct. The inevitable result of reins and rope and the weather. These are working hands now. First time? The barber asks. Trail drive. Yes. Thought so. He brushes the hair from your shoulders. You going back next season? And you discover, to your own mild surprise, that the answer is already in your mind before you consciously examine it. Yes, you say. The question that brought us here, the question at the beginning of all this, is why cowboys didn't draw guns on each other, and by now you know the answer because you've lived it. But let me say it plainly anyway, because history is better when it's explicit. It wasn't nobility. It wasn't that cowboys were more evolved or more moral or less violent than the mythology says. Cowboys were human beings, which means they were fully capable of violence and occasionally engaged in it. But violence on the trail has a cost that almost nothing in the mythology accounts for. Cost 1. You can't run the drive with dead men. The math is simple. Every man on the outfit covers territory that can't be covered without him. And if you remove a man, you remove his territory. And the cattle that were in that territory are now unmanaged. And unmanaged cattle on a trail drive become a problem that costs more than whatever the disagreement was worth. Cost 2, the gun costs a month's wages. The bullets cost extra. This is not a trivial consideration for men working for $30 a month. Every bullet you fire is money spent, and the bullets are hard to replace out here, where the nearest town is sometimes 3 days behind you, and 3 days is a direction you're not going. Cost 3. The trail boss has absolute authority, and the trail boss will fire you. Not maybe fire you. Will fire you. A cowhand who introduces violence into the outfit, who pulls a weapon on another hand, who starts a fight that injures someone, is walked off the drive on the spot. Walked off. not dropped at the next town. Walked off, wherever you happen to be, with whatever you can carry. And news travels in the cattle business. The network of trail bosses and ranch owners and cattle buyers is not large. If you're known as a man who causes this kind of trouble, getting hired onto the next drive becomes much harder. Cost 4. Out here, the actual dangers, the rivers, the storms, the cattle, the terrain, require your complete attention. The energy that you'd spend on a grudge, the hours you'd waste on a conflict, the focus that goes into planning and executing an act of violence against a fellow human being, all of that is energy and hours and focus that is supposed to be going to the herd. The trail doesn't care about your personal disputes. The Red River does not pause for your drama. And cost 5, the one nobody talks about directly but that underlies all the others, you need each other. Not in a sentimental way, not in a we're all brothers under the sun way, in the most practical survival mathematics way. On the night watch in the dark when the lightning comes and the cattle go, the person who rides up alongside you is the difference between getting the mill and not getting the mill, between the drive surviving and the drive ending. That person's name might be Walsh, who you have arguments with about things you will not remember in 6 months. That person might be Mendoza, who speaks Spanish faster than you can follow, and who's forgotten more about cattle than you will ever know. That person is still the person next to you in the storm. You save the violence for the things that actually threaten you. You save the gun for the rattlesnake. And the rattlesnake, it turns out, is never another cowboy. There is a place, a few miles outside of Abilene, where the land rises slightly. Not a hill exactly. The Kansas plain doesn't do hills, but a gentle swell in the grass that is just high enough to offer a view. You find it the morning before you leave for the ride back. You're not sure what brought you here exactly. A Sunday instinct, a need to be somewhere quiet before the return journey, before another 3 months of living inside the machinery of the drive. From the rise you can see Abilene to the north, the water tower and the grain elevators and the smoke from the kitchens and the stoves. You can see the cattle pens still full, other drives still arriving, the season not yet over. You can see the railroad, that long iron line running east into the distance until it disappears. To the south, the plain, the way you came. 700 miles of it, roughly. 700 miles of Texas and Oklahoma territory and Kansas that you have walked, ridden, technically, but it feels like walked, over the past 2 months. The Red River is back there somewhere, 3 weeks south, running its slow flood season course. The campsite where you got rained on for 4 straight days is back there. The crossing where you nearly lost the 3 cattle. The open ground where the stamp hit and you kept your seat by luck and muscle memory, and a horse named Senator who made a decision in favour of continuing. All of that is behind you. The wind comes from the south, as it so often does, carrying the dry grass smell of the trail. It pushes against your face and gets into the space between your hat and your hair, and moves on north, toward Abilene, toward the railroad, toward everything that comes after the trail. You're 22 years old. You've done a thing, not a small thing, not an easy thing. You think about your father, the cotton that wouldn't grow, the quiet fury at the dinner table, the farm that is going to fail, or maybe already has, or maybe has found some way to continue that you don't know about yet. You have $90 plus the bonus. You've already been to the post office and sent some of it home, because the post office here handles money orders, and the alternative is carrying cash through Oklahoma territory for 3 months, which is not the alternative you want. You sent $40. Your father has never received $40 in a single envelope in his life. You wonder what his face will look like. The other 50 is in your pocket, enough to fund next season, enough to stake you through the winter if you find work near San Antonio, enough to be the beginning of something if you're careful with it. Calhoun! You turn. Aldridge is on his horse 10 yards back. You didn't hear him come up. You're either more relaxed than you thought, or less attentive, and you choose to believe relaxed. Mr. Aldridge. He rides up alongside you and looks south, the same direction you've been looking. He doesn't say anything for a moment. You'll be back next season, he says. It's not a question. Yes, sir? Another moment. You did well with the mill, he says. In the storm, kept your right flank. This is, you understand, extraordinary praise from a man who called you by your last name for 3 months and told you you'd earn your wages without specifying exactly how. Thank you, sir. He sits with that for a moment. 3 years on the trail, he says. You'll be able to run your own string without me. 5 years, you'll have enough to stake a small outfit yourself if you're careful, depending on where the market goes. He turns his horse back toward Abilene. Be at the rendezvous point by sundown, he says. We ride at dawn. And he goes, back toward the town without looking back. You turn south again. The grass moves, the long, slow swell of it, the way Mendoza once said it was like the sea. It does look like the sea from up here. The same continuous movement, the same sense of scale, the same indifference to the small figures moving across it. 3 years and you can run your own string. 5 years and a small outfit of your own. You let that settle. Let it become real the way real things become real. Slowly, through repeated contact, through the gradual accumulation of evidence that this is not just a thought, but a possibility. That could be you. 5 years from now, standing where Aldridge stands, knowing what Aldridge knows, looking at a drive the way he looks at drive, reading the cattle and the weather and the men with the literacy of long practice. That is a life. That is a real life. A life that you could actually live, starting from where you are standing right now on a small rise in the Kansas grass, with the railroad to the north and the trail behind you. You stay for a few more minutes. The wind keeps coming. The grass keeps moving. The town sits quiet in the distance, getting its next wave of cowboys and their money ready for another day of mutually beneficial transactions. Then you ride back. The decades that follow will change everything. In 1880, the barbed wire will arrive in the Texas Panhandle and begin its division of the open range into fenced land, and the era of the open drive, the Chisholm Trail, the Western Trail, the old routes that carried millions of cattle north from Texas over 20 years, will begin to close down, not suddenly, not in one dramatic moment. Gradually the way a river changes course over years, almost imperceptibly until one day you look and the channel is somewhere else entirely. By 1885 the drives are already less frequent. The railroads have pushed south into Texas, and you can load cattle in Texas now without walking them to Kansas. The logic that created the Chisholm Trail in the first place, the gap between where the cattle were and where the railroads were, has been closed by the railroads moving to fill it. By 1890, the large trail drives are essentially over. 20 years. That's the American cattle trail era. 20 years of millions of cattle and tens of thousands of cowhands walking north along the same routes, sleeping under the same stars, crossing the same rivers. The mythology that replaces it is constructed almost immediately. The dime novels were already writing about the West while the West was still happening. Ned Buntline was inventing Buffalo Bill's persona while Buffalo Bill was still actually doing things. The gap between the real West and the West of entertainment was small from the beginning and narrowed to nothing almost before the real West ended. By the time you're 45 years old, sitting in your ranch house outside San Antonio, because you did it, you ran the 3 years and the 5 years and the small outfit, the West of the movies is already nothing like the West you lived. The gunfights happen in every picture. The cowboys are clean. Nobody talks about the beans. You watch one once through a theatre window in San Antonio in 1912 or 1913. A moving picture, the kind they're making now. 2 men on a street. The stare. The hands hovering. The draw. You watch it for a few minutes, then keep walking. Walsh would have had something to say about it. Walsh is gone. A heart thing in 1902 at the farm in Virginia he'd bought with his trail money. Mendoza is alive, back in Texas, retired, with grandchildren who you suspect will not be going on trail drives. Thomas, the boy who managed the remuda, who could rope better at 14 than you can now, runs a stock operation in the valley. Aldridge died in 1896, which was the right kind of death for a man like Aldridge. Quickly, still working, not waiting for permission. The cattle industry didn't end. It changed. It was always going to change. Things that are 20 years old are usually in the middle of becoming something else. But for those 20 years, something real happened. Men walked cattle across 700 miles of American landscape and got them to market and slept on the ground and crossed the rivers and ate the beans. It was not glamorous, and it was not what the movies say it was. It was hard, physical, cooperative work performed by people who were too tired for mythology. Save the violence for the rattlesnakes. It's getting late. You know it. Somewhere in the place where you keep time, the part of you that tracks the rotation of days without being asked. The light behind your eyelids has been fading for a while, the room cooling slightly, the sounds of wherever you are settling into nighttime sounds. The trail is behind you now, all 700 miles of it. The campfire smoke and the Red River and the stampede and the beans and the cook and his Dutch oven and the night watch songs. The stars you can only see when there's nothing between you and them. The feel of the saddle after 6 hours that becomes the feel of the saddle after 12 hours that becomes just the way your body is, just the thing you live inside. The gun is checked at the marshal's office. The herd is in the pens. The money's in your pocket. You've earned the rest. Let the day settle the way days settle at their end. Not all at once, but in layers. The urgency going first, then the noise, then the movement, then the thoughts that were trying to finish themselves and can finish now or can wait. It doesn't matter, because there's time. There's time now. There's the long, soft expanse of sleep opening out in front of you like the Kansas plain. Think about the grass moving, the way it moves when the wind comes from the south. That long, slow swell that Mendoza said was like the sea, the whole landscape breathing. The same wind that moved the grass in 1875 is still moving. The grass is different grass, and the cattle are long gone, and the trail is a highway now. But the wind is the same wind, working across the same land, making the same sound in whatever grows there. Some things don't change. The human need for the night watch to end. The bone-deep gratitude for a warm place when you've been cold. The particular, specific peace that comes from finishing a hard thing and knowing you finished it. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have what you need, not what you want. That's a longer list and it'll still be there tomorrow. But what you need, the basic necessities of continuing, the roof and the warmth and the rest. That's more than a lot of people have. Tonight, It's enough. There is one more thing you need to understand before you sleep. One more piece of this, because the story of why cowboys didn't draw guns on each other isn't complete without the story of what replaced the truth, which is the lie. Not a malicious lie. Not a lie someone sat down and decided to tell. The kind of lie that grows naturally from a gap between what happened and what people wanted to have happened. The kind of lie that starts as entertainment and ends as mythology so thick that the real thing underneath gets permanently buried. We need to talk about the dime novels. In 1860, a publishing house in New York called Beadle and Adams released a book called Molesca, the Indian wife of the white hunter, and sold 65,000 copies in the first few months. 65,000 copies of a 10-cent paperback adventure novel. The math on that was impossible to ignore. By 1865, Beadle and Adams were publishing new titles every 2 weeks. By 1870, there were multiple publishers competing in the dime novel market, all of them hungry for material, all of them discovering the same thing. Americans back east. And not just Americans, but Europeans too, particularly the English, who developed a fascination with the American West that had very little relationship to the actual American West, would pay 10 cents, and then 10 cents again, and then 10 cents again for stories about a landscape most of them would never see. The writers who produced these books were working fast, very fast. Not because they were bad writers, some of them were quite skilled, but because the market demanded volume, and volume at that pace means you're not pausing to verify your facts against primary sources. What they knew about the West came from other dime novels, newspaper reports that were themselves often exaggerated, occasional interviews with people who had been West and were now back East and were giving interviews, and their own imagination, which was doing most of the work. What they gave their readers was gunfights, lots of gunfights. A gunfight every few chapters at minimum, a final gunfight of resolution at the climax, smaller gunfights scattered throughout to maintain the pace. The gunfight became structurally necessary to the genre in the same way that a love interest is structurally necessary to a romance novel. The reader expected it. The reader was paying for it. You delivered the gunfight, or you delivered something else, and something else wasn't what was selling. So the gunfight was delivered, and the gunfight, repeated across hundreds of books and millions of readers over decades, became the West. You're going to understand this better if you know what the actual number was. Historians have spent a lot of time going through the records of the cattle towns, Abilene, Dodge City, Caldwell, Wichita, all the railroad destinations of the major drives, counting documented gunfight deaths, the actual ones, the ones with coroner's records and newspaper accounts and witnesses. For Abilene in its entire peak cattle era, the number of people killed in gunfights was somewhere in the range of 2 to 5 people per year. Per year. Abilene at the height of the cattle season was processing thousands of cowboys. Thousands of men arriving tired and dirty and paid. Men who'd been living in close quarters under stress for months. Men who had guns on the hips before they checked them, and in some cases had guns they hadn't checked. 2 to 5 people per year. Dodge City, which became the most famous cattle town of all and which the mythology treats as an almost continuous bloodbath, had approximately 15 documented gunfight deaths in its entire peak decade. 15 in 10 years. These are not large numbers. These are the numbers you'd find in any city of equivalent size and social stress, without the mythology, without the legend. These are the numbers of a place where violence existed, because violence exists everywhere humans live in all times and all places, but where violence was not the organising principle of daily life. The organising principle of daily life in Abilene was commerce, the exchange of cattle for money for goods and services, the same ordinary machinery that organises daily life in every functional town in every era. The guns were real, but the violence they enabled was far rarer than the stories required. Here is what Wild Bill Hickok actually was. James Butler Hickok, who acquired the nickname Wild Bill somewhere around the age of 23 through a combination of genuine bravery, considerable personal style, and the kind of early publicity that comes from being photogenic and available for interviews, was the Marshal of Abilene in 1871. His tenure lasted from April to December, 8 months. In those 8 months, Hickok killed 2 men. One of them was a gambler and gunman named Phil Coe, who drew on him first during an altercation outside a saloon. The other was Hickok's own deputy, Mike Williams, who ran toward the sound of gunfire to help and was shot by mistake in the chaos of the dark. Hickok never recovered from killing Williams. People who knew him well said it changed him, that the accidental death of his own deputy was the thing that undid something in him that had been intact before. After December 1871, Abilene decided it no longer needed a celebrity marshal and declined to renew his contract. The cattle season was declining anyway, and with it the need for Hickok's particular skill set. Hickok spent the next 5 years doing various things, performing in Wild West shows, gambling, working as a scout, and died in Deadwood, South Dakota in 1876, shot from behind while playing poker by a man named Jack McCall, who has no great mythology of his own, because being shot in the back while playing cards is not the narrative that makes for good dime novels. Hickok was 39 years old. His entire career as a lawman and gunfighter, the whole of what made him legendary, spanned roughly 15 years. In that time, the documented number of men he killed in gunfights is between 6 and possibly 9, depending on which incidents you count and how, and the vast majority of those were in official capacities, as a marshal, as a scout, in situations where someone drew on him first. 6 to 9 men, in 15 years. The mythology required him to have killed dozens, hundreds in some versions. The dime novels that turned him into a legend were writing about a man who killed people constantly, for whom gunfights were so routine they barely rated an entry in the diary. The real Hickok was a complicated, occasionally troubled man who was very good at his specific job, and whose specific job was less often shooting people than people thought, because the specific job of a frontier marshal is making the town safe for commerce, and commerce does not require constant gunfights. Commerce requires the threat of gunfights, the credible possibility that violence will occur if you step out of bounds, and the actual occurrence of that violence rarely. Hickok's value as a marshal was that men knew he could draw faster than they could. That knowledge kept most men from drawing at all. This is in fact the real logic of the gunfighter's reputation. The fastest gun in town doesn't use it much. He doesn't need to. The reputation does the work. And the reputation, once established, tends to be maintained more by the stories people tell about it than by new demonstrations. By the time the dime novels got hold of Hickok, the stories were already doing more work than the man. After he died, the stories did everything. There was a man you met once briefly in Abilene on that first visit after the drive. You don't remember meeting him particularly well. It was at the bar of one of the saloons, not the expensive whiskey Walsh was pursuing, but the ordinary kind, the first drink of the evening. a man sat down next to you who had the particular quality of watchfulness that men have when they've spent time in situations where inattention is expensive. He was maybe 40, well-dressed but not ostentatiously. He had large, well-kept hands. You talked about nothing much for a few minutes. The drive, the season, the cattle prices. "You find the town smaller than you expected?" he asked at one point. "I didn't know what to expect," you said. He nodded at that as though it was a better answer than the usual one. "Everyone expects something dramatic," he said. "They've read the books. They're looking for the shootout on the main street." He looked at his drink. Main streets are where commerce happens. Nobody who understands commerce wants a shootout there. You thought about the sign at the edge of town, "Leave firearms with the marshal's office." "Who are you?" you asked, because there was something about his quality of attention that suggested a specific answer. He told you his name. You didn't recognize it immediately, though you'd heard it. He was a lawman, currently between assignments. He had worked in several cattle towns. He was passing through Abilene on his way to somewhere else. "Is it what they say it is?" you asked. "Your work." He smiled at something, though not at you exactly, at a private observation. "My work is mostly paperwork," he said, "and talking. A lot of talking. You'd be surprised how many situations that can resolve, if you do the talking right." He finished his drink and set the glass down. "The shooting," he said, "is the thing that happens when the talking fails, and if you're good at the talking, it doesn't fail much." He left. You found out later from Walsh, who knew the name, who the man was. A lawman whose name would appear in later accounts of the period, whose life would eventually attract the attention of exactly the writers who were turning everything into something bigger and simpler and more violent than it was. The paperwork and the talking would not survive the translation. The thing about the mythology is that it needed to be that way. Not for cynical reasons, not because someone decided to manipulate history for profit, though profit was certainly involved, but because America in the decades after the Civil War was a country that had done something to itself that it needed to process. The war had killed somewhere between 620,000 and 750,000 people, depending on how you count. It had divided families and communities and left the survivors carrying a weight of grief and guilt and rage that had no clean outlet. Into that context, the West arrived. The West was big. The West was fresh. The West had not been ruined yet by what had just happened, or at least it seemed that way from a distance. The West was a place where you could start over, where the old rules were still being written, where a man of sufficient skill and courage could carve something out of the landscape and call it his. The gunfighter was the distilled fantasy of that possibility. Not just skill and courage, but physical dominance. The fantasy of a world where merit was measured in seconds, literally in the time it took to draw and fire, and where winning that measurement meant something absolute and clean. The real world doesn't work like that. It never has. Winning the draw doesn't give you better land or better crops or a market for your goods. It gives you a dead man and a legal problem. But the fantasy needed something simpler than the real world, and the dime novels gave it the simplicity it needed. By the time you're 40, the fantasy has so completely replaced the memory that when you try to tell people what the trail was actually like, what the beans tasted like, what the river crossing smelled like, what the night watch sounded like, they listen politely and then go right back to the version they prefer. That version has a gunfight in every chapter. Yours had beans. The last night on the trail, the night before you arrived in Abilene, There was a conversation you didn't tell earlier that needs telling now. Mendoza found you after supper at the edge of the campfire light, where you'd gone to look at the first visible lights of the town on the northern horizon. Not bright lights. The town was still 2 days out, but faint ones, the glow of something inhabited in the dark distance. Mendoza sat down beside you without preamble. He had a way of existing in silence that didn't feel like waiting. He was simply present, in the direct way that people who have spent a lot of time outdoors are present. "First drive," he said after a while. "Yes, you did all right." From Mendoza, this was a more significant compliment than it sounds. You had observed over 2 months that Mendoza did not distribute praise carelessly. He didn't withhold it from spite or maintain a pose of unimpressibility. He simply calibrated it accurately, and when he said you did all right, he meant you did all right, specifically against a standard he understood from experience. "The mill," you said. "In the storm. I nearly lost my flank." "Nearly," he agreed. "You didn't." A pause. "The first drive is the one where you learn what you can do," he said. "Not what you thought you could do. What you can actually do." He looked at the distant lights. "Those are different things. How long until I know the difference?" He considered this with the same seriousness he brought to reading cattle. "You start to know it when you stop expecting to fail," he said. "When the hard thing comes and the first thought isn't, 'What do I do?' but just doing it. When the gap between the thinking and the doing closes." You thought about the river, the cattle turning, the 3 seconds of pure action before the thinking caught up. "The stampede," you said. Mendoza nodded slowly. "That's when I saw it." "Saw what?" "That you'd be back." He stood up, brushing the grass from his pants in the way he always did, a habitual gesture. "There are men who come out here once," he said. "They do the drive, they take the money, they go back to whatever they came from and they tell the stories, and that's enough for them." He looked at you. "You're not that. You'll be back next season, and the season after, and somewhere in there it'll stop being something you do and start being something you are." He walked back toward the fire. You looked at the distant lights for a while longer. Then you went to sleep, because tomorrow was another early start and the drives wait for nobody. Let me tell you the last true thing about the Cowboys. There is a photograph. Several photographs, actually. The medium arrived just in time to catch the last decade of the trail era. Black and white, obviously. Often slightly blurred, because the exposure times of the era required stillness, and cowhands were not naturally still. The photographs show men sitting on the ground around fires or standing in loose groups in front of equipment. They are wearing their actual clothes, not costumes. The hats are battered in the way that working hats are battered, creased by weather, shaped by habit, not by theatrical design. The boots are dirty. The faces show the specific particular aging that comes from years of outdoor work. They are not posing heroically. They are just there, in the photographs, the way anyone is in a photograph taken when they're not performing for the camera. Tired, mostly. Relaxed, in the way that people who've been working hard all day are relaxed when they stop. They are looking directly at the camera in some photographs and away from it in others. In a few, they are clearly in conversation with someone off to the side, and you can see the animation of the argument or the story or the joke caught in the blurred half-second of the exposure. They don't look like gunfighters. They look like people who drove cattle. That is exactly what they were. The mythology came after. The mythology needed heroes, and it found them in this landscape, and it put guns in their hands and made those guns the point. The guns were real. The skill required to use them was real. The landscape was real and genuinely extraordinary. But the men were workers, skilled workers, tough workers, workers who did things that required physical and mental resources that the mythology, in trying to make them legendary, somehow made smaller. Because the legendary figure is simple, fast, hard, solitary, defined by violence, and the actual man is complex, tired and funny and sometimes afraid and grinding through the long middle of a 3-month drive because the alternative is going home with nothing, same as it ever was. The alternative to the drive was the farm that wouldn't grow cotton. You were always going to choose the drive. Now let the rest of it go. The conversations you've been carrying around all day, the ones that didn't finish, that felt unresolved when you put them down, they'll be there tomorrow. They're patient. They can wait. The list of things you need to do, also patient, also waiting. Tomorrow has plenty of room. What doesn't need you tonight is everything. The trail is settled. The cattle are in the pens. The money is counting itself in someone's ledger in Abilene. The Red River is running its own course without any assistance from you. The stampede happened and resolved, and you came out the other side, and so did most of the cattle, and that's all the outcome that was available, and it was enough. It was enough. The stars over the Kansas plain are still up there, as they always are, above the electric light and the cloud cover and the distance of a century and a half. The same stars, Orion and the Dipper and the Southern Cross if you go far enough south. Stars that were there when Mendoza was teaching himself to read cattle, and when Walsh was singing Virginia songs in the dark, and when a 14-year-old boy named Tomas was managing a string of horses better than most grown men could. Those stars don't need you either. Nothing needs you tonight. Tonight you're allowed to just be in the place where you are, in the warmth that you have, with the sounds of the world doing its ordinary nighttime things around you. The workhorses are resting. The drive is done. Let your thoughts slow the way they slow towards sleep. Not stopping all at once, but losing momentum. The urgent ones going first, then the interesting ones, then the ones that were just keeping themselves company. Let them fade the way campfire light fades. Not blowing out, just diminishing. The circle of visible world getting smaller and warmer and more manageable until it's just this moment, just this breath, just the particular darkness behind your closed eyes. Think about the grass moving if you want something to think about. The long, slow swell of it. The wind coming from the south. The way the whole plain breathes when it moves. And then don't think about anything. Let sleep come the way the night watch came. Your turn, then the next man's turn, then the turn after that. The whole night divided and parcelled out so that no one person carries all of it. Someone else has the watch. It's not yours tonight. Let them have it. Let your breathing slow. Let the sounds of Abilene fade into the sounds of wherever you are, which are quieter now, which are the sounds of a place settling into nighttime, the last movements of the world arranging itself for the hours ahead, and the stars going about their ancient business, and the grass, and the wind, and rest, and nothing more. Good night.